1968, and Jim and Ingrid had spent 3 years trying to advance their musical careers with very little to show for it. A single phone call was about to change their luck. The life and times of Jim Croce will return in a moment on TNN. In the fall of 1968, the Croces got a phone call from Tommy Picardo, a college friend of Jim's. Picardo was now a record producer in New York who'd heard Jim and Ingrid's music. He invited them to come to New York to record an album. After more than 5 years of making music together, their dream was finally coming true.
We packed up our things, and within 24 hours, we were sleeping on Jim's friend's floor in New York City. And we made the album within a week. And before we knew it, we had signed contracts, and we were on the road doing about 300 college concerts a year.
I like to think about her and the way she used to love me, but I just can't live without her, 'cause her arms are not around me, and the season's getting later, and my body's getting colder, and the vespers ring and I'm all alone without my love beside me.
Ingrid and Jim Croce did not sell well. Knowing that they had the talent and the heart for their music made it that much more difficult to deal with the record's failure. For the two artists whose previous experience had been that of troubadours playing small stages to enthusiastic crowds, it was a bittersweet introduction into the world of commercial music.
I don't think it was a particularly enriching experience as I remember it for him or Ingrid. It was, quite honestly, as one of the producers, you know, trying to squeeze the toothpaste back in the tube, you know, making something commercial that should have just been celebrated as it was.
Jim and Ingrid made the most of it, enjoying a promotional tour around the United States and Canada. After a year on the road, they returned to New York, hoping to reap the rewards of their hard work. What they got was a hard business lesson that they'd never forget.
The way it worked out was that once we signed a contract, which we didn't know, they were signed in perpetuity, and the rest of our lives we would be signed to the contract that we signed in 1968. For a person who hated authority and hated boundaries, it was a very tough thing for Jim.
New York, which just a year earlier had been an exciting launching point for the Croce's career, now felt like a prison. Broke and without any gigs on the horizon, Jim resorted to taking jobs singing backup vocals for commercial spots. The man whose lifeblood was songs filled with characters on wonderful life journeys had hit rock bottom.
He dreaded it. I mean, I'd sit in the studio, it'd be like take 16, the Bank of Wisconsin or something. I mean, forgive me, Wisconsin, but it was just, it was hard work, actually. It would exhaust him.
Finally, after a difficult and painful year, the Croces decided to move back to Pennsylvania. The dreams they'd hoped to realize in New York had been shattered. From the broken pieces, Jim culled a song that sadly and eloquently expressed their disillusionment.
Been in so many places, you know I've run so many races, and looked into the empty faces of the people of the night, and something is just not right, 'cause I know that I gotta get out of here. I'm so alone. Don't you know that I gotta get out of here, 'cause New York's not my home.
Settling into a farmhouse in the countryside near Philadelphia, Jim and Ingrid hoped the beginning of the 70s would be kinder to them than the end of the 60s. Jim was invigorated by being back in the country. He returned to his earlier routine of driving trucks or working construction by day and playing small clubs by night. The Croce's farmhouse became a mecca for other musicians who would gather there on the weekends to eat great food, drink cheap wine, and play music.
I think the thing about those days, too, that I love so much, we sat around and played a lot. There was music all the time. Before everyone became pressured so much by careers and having to do it so much that it becomes exhausting. It was fun. It was just fun.
I felt very fortunate to be among the many, many people that would flock to their house on weekends, starting early on Fridays, and as soon as they could get out of work to get there, to listen to Jim play and sing. I even got a chance to watch him work out new tunes.
It was a great time, and I don't know of any other time in my life that there was as much art in the air as there were in the 60s. The talent of Bonnie Raitt and James Taylor and certainly Arlo Guthrie and the Manhattan Transfer and the people that were around us at the time, they were the best, and they still are.
It was a time of great creative inspiration and production for Jim. He wrote dozens of songs, honing his songwriting skills. But no record deals were made, and Jim and Ingrid continually struggled to get by. Making matters worse was the pressure Jim felt from his parents. They sensed that their son was agonizing and were not happy that he had chosen to continue pursuing his music.
It did bother them quite a bit, and for a while there was quite a bit of tension. And there were times that they didn't even realize what Jim was doing. He wouldn't let them know that he was struggling, that he was going into music. Everyone would just more or less cover for him.
In 1971, more than a year after having moved back to Pennsylvania, Jim felt no closer to his goal of making music his career. While he enjoyed hanging out with his blue-collar pals, Jim felt he'd spent enough time living the life he now wanted to convey in song. Haunted by his doubts, it took a miracle to turn Jim's darkest fears into his brightest moment.
I found out that I was pregnant, and I told Jim that after coming out of the doctors that we were going to have a baby, and it was a very enormous responsibility in his life, the thought of being a father. He didn't take it lightly. And I think it might have been the catalyst to making Jim very serious. He didn't like to be serious, but he knew that if he didn't make it before the baby was born, that there was no chance that he could ever do it again. So he sat down that night, late in the evening, and he wrote Time in a Bottle.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you.
Into that ballad, Jim poured out his feelings towards his wife and unborn child. The song was filled with urgency, tenderness, and love. It was a song that would touch millions as it propelled Jim into stardom. It was also a song that would prove to be tragically prophetic in its message.
But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them.
In 1971, after close to a decade of trying, Jim Croce was on the brink of success. The upcoming birth of his first child inspired him to put his 28 years of feelings and experiences into words and music. In less than a week, he wrote half an album's worth of songs, including Time in a Bottle, Operator, and You Don't Mess Around with Jim. The songs were well received by Jim's producers, and just a few months later would be raved over by a national audience. But before he got a chance to experience his success, Jim suffered a painful loss when his father died.
He really needed and wanted the approval of his dad mainly, as far as what he was going to do with his future. And it did upset him. And the sad part is his dad never realized what Jim would become. Because when he did pass away, Jim was not popular yet. He was working at it, but he really didn't understand his son's music at that time. So I think that upset Jim.
Within a few months of his father's death, millions of people around the world began to appreciate the funky, funny, feeling-filled music of Jim Croce.
You say you don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't speed into the wind, you don't pull the mask off old Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim.
Before long, very long at all, he had You Don't Mess Around with Jim as number one, and he was traveling 360 days a year, it seemed, all over the country, all over Europe.
Jim's first solo album, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, was a huge success. His live shows, featuring his one-man band and close friend Maury Muehlheisen, consistently sold out. Jim Croce was America's storyteller, with each song stemming from a life experience.
Isn't that the way they say it goes? Well, let's forget all that and give me the number if you can't find it, so I can call just to tell him I'm flying in the show. Overcome the blow.
Jim used to say that the operator had been written when he was in the National Guard, and he was waiting at the phone booth in the middle of a big rainstorm, and there were guys waiting in line with their raincoats on and, covered with hoods, and he was listening to, whether they were getting a Dear John phone call or whether they were getting a I love you phone call or whatever, and it came to him, the idea of the operator.
A few months earlier, Jim had been worrying about how he was going to support his wife and soon-to-be-born child. Now he was constantly on the road, just barely able to witness his son Adrian James, nicknamed AJ's birth in September 1971. The time apart was difficult for the whole family, but particularly for Ingrid.
The saddest part, I think, of being a partner to a person who travels is that you get to experience the most wonderful part of your child growing up. And not only is there sadness that you can't share that with someone at night when you see your child walk for the first time or say words that they've never said before. And that was a very, very tough time for me. And for Jim, too, I think.
And he's bad, Leroy Brown, the baddest man in the whole damn town. Better than old King Kong, and meaner than a junkyard dog. Yes.
In 1973, Jim released his second solo album, Life and Times. Bad Bad Leroy Brown was a monster hit, firmly establishing Jim as the chronicler of bluesy blue-collar pop. The college-educated intellectual had succeeded in making himself accessible to millions through the image of a working man. It was an image that, like many facets of Jim's character, had both a humorous and serious side.
Then he started getting tattooed and started really becoming like, bad Jim Croce, I said, what's up with that?
There was something about his sadness that I think I was able to ascertain over the years. It was that he wanted to be like other people, as we all do, but didn't know quite how to make that happen. So music was the common ground that he could use to touch people.
Well, I know it's kinda late. I hope I didn't wake you, but what I've got to say can't wait. I know you'd understand. Every time I tried to tell you, the words just came out wrong. So I have to say I love you in a song.
I'll have to say I love you in a song says it really well, better than he ever could say it in words. And that's what he was telling people. You know, there was a lot of love being shared through the music. Saying I love you wasn't easy for Jim, but showing that he loved people really was there every time he sang. So it was his gift to people and to himself in exchange.
Jim Croce was enjoying sharing his gifts as much as his fans were enjoying receiving them. His popularity was increasing, and plans were in motion for a number of projects. None of them would be realized when a tragedy transformed Jim Croce from a star into a legend. In the summer of 1973, Jim Croce was riding high. Several of his songs topped the charts. He had just recorded his third album, and offers were pouring in for film and television projects. As a way of taking advantage of these offers and to start a new and closer chapter in their life as a family, the Croces decided to move to San Diego.
Movies were next, and TV appearances were next. It was as if he'd kind of gotten to another level, and he was hoping that when we moved to San Diego, he'd be able to spend more time at home. And the 2 years on the road were kind of what he'd paid in order to be able to come back and get back into a real life again.
Life in San Diego looked to be promising. The Croces had just moved into their new home and celebrated their son's second birthday when Jim got called to the road one last time.
This was a makeup tour that he was doing, and he had been paid, I think, a very minimal amount of money to do the tour, but he never liked to disappoint anyone, so he was going out to do this trip. And when he left, there was a great deal of emotion riding on this trip, because as soon as he came back, we kind of knew that we had a lot of things to make right. So we went out one night right before he left, had a great night together, and the next morning he left.
Jim's tour took him south to Louisiana. On September 20th, 1973, Ingrid Croce got her nightly phone call from her husband.
This night, AJ was out in the yard, stark naked, running after the dog. And I said, Jim, I can't talk. I've got to get out and get the dog. AJ's running after him. And he paused and he said, Ing, I love you. And for Jim, that was extraordinary, because he wasn't able to say those words very easily. And I said, I love you too. I've got to go. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Ingrid would never talk to Jim again. That night, after she put AJ to bed, Jim's small plane hit a tree during takeoff and crashed. Jim, Maury, and the 3 other men aboard were killed.
I got a phone call about 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was really groggy, and I'd had a really bad, strange dream the night before. And I woke up to hear my stepmother's voice telling me, are you okay? And I said, yeah. And she asked me, had I heard the news? And she said there'd been an accident. And I said, and Jim's dead, right?
And it was terrible for the whole family. We loved him as a person, we loved his music, and
I still get really emotional about that. You ask yourself why? Why does something like that just, sort of grab and give you a little gnarl here? And only thing you can do is, when something like that happens, I guess you feel so bad for yourself because part of you died.
Just 30 years old, Jim Croce's life had been ripped away, leaving an unfulfilled future and heartbroken family, friends, and fans. His third album, I've Got a Name, recorded just a few weeks before his death, was released posthumously. The songs and stories it contained became a final tribute to Jim's work and was especially treasured by his many mournful fans. Jim's own prophetic lyrics from Time in a Bottle became his epitaph, and everyone for whom Jim had meaning was forced to accept their sad message.
But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them.
In the years following Jim Croce's death, his music has continued to grow in popularity. In addition to the original recordings that continue to be popular, Jim's music has inspired a whole new generation of artists.
I think one of the reasons that I really wanted to do music passionately, more so than just enjoying it, was because of the connections that I made with important people in my life because of music like Jim's. It moved me personally, and to share that intimacy really is what it was.
One place where Jim's memory is celebrated daily is at the San Diego restaurant bearing his name, founded and run by Ingrid Croce. Here, people soak up great food, memories of Jim, and live music, including that of Jim's son, AJ, who has followed in his father's footsteps.
I opened Croce's Restaurants and Jazz Bar in the Gas Lamp with the idea that I could give people that loved Jim an opportunity to come and see photos and his guitar and his son, and see how the legacy, not only in the music that continues to play for all of us on the radio or on TV, is being carried on, but how AJ and other musicians who need a place like we did to hone their talents have a place to come every night at Croce's and play jazz, rhythm and blues, and make people happy.
Whether at Croce's restaurant, the small towns that Jim loved to play, or the construction sites, truck stops, and bars that inspired so much of his music, Jim's spirit and song live on in all of those places and many more. The gift he gave to all those who listened came from the deepest part of his soul. It's a gift that will be enjoyed by millions for many years to come.
For a man who's not, you know, whose body of work is relatively small, you know, all of it is cherished. You know, there's not a song he's written that is not reissued again and again. And
he wrote such beautiful music, and it'll be around forever, and everyone enjoys it, and so do we. We really do enjoy listening to it over and over. It seems like he hasn't left us, that he's still here when we're listening to those songs.
He was a voice of the people of the time, and those songs really transcended just the words that he was saying in them. They were the feelings that people were having at the time. So they are still here. People hopefully are still relating to those feelings inside of them.
You hear it every week on the radio in one form or another, either original recordings or wonderful arrangements thereafter. It really has hit that American standard icon category, and I think that music is just going to be around for a long time. When it's right, it's really right, and obviously it was.